Well, for more, we're joined by Halim Shebaya, who is a political analyst based in Beirut. He joins us now. Thank you for your time. I would like to focus on Iran first, if that's all right. How has Iran's involvement escalated the conflict?
Iran's involvement in the Syrian crisis has been from the start, in various forms. And eventually it took the form of a full-scale intervention of some Iranian forces, especially the ICRG, and also later on with Hezbollah, the Lebanese party, that also became involved in the war. For some context, for the viewers, obviously, the Iranian involvement is basically due to the fact that Syria, headed by the Assad regime and headed by the presidency of Bashar al-Assad, is part of what is called the resistance axis, or Mahwar al-Mumena'a. So it was a narrative that was framed on the part of the Assad regime, Iran and Hezbollah and its supporters, that it was really a war against this axis because of their opposition to Israel and because of their opposition to the West, etc. Now, the problem, of course, with this narrative is that it didn't take into account the fact of the legitimate grievances of the Syrian people that was behind the start of the uprising or the revolution, and which eventually turned into a bloody civil war and an armed conflict. So the Iranian involvement, of course, was one of the major parts of the escalation of the conflict, just as all parties to the conflict that were involved, external parties, also contributed to the escalation. This involvement of Iran can only be understood, of course, within that framework of the resistance axis, in the sense that there was no really looking at this conflict from the perspective of whether, it was at that point, after the happenings of Egypt and Tunis and Libya and even Bahrain to a certain extent, the Syrian conflict and the demands of the Syrian people, so to speak, were really just understood and eventually only framed as part of an anti-resistance axis, so to speak, and which had to be confronted. And it's also worth noting that even at the beginning of the conflict, for example, the Hezbollah party, by its head, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, also acknowledged that there were legitimate grievances on the side of the Syrian people. But slowly, unfortunately, with what for them, and obviously the argument from their perspective is, and when Hezbollah got involved in the Syrian war, it was under the argument that they were protecting Lebanon, they were perhaps protecting some of the holy shrines, and also they wanted to prevent Daesh from entering Lebanon, or even the extremist forces before Daesh was formed. So I think this is really the context within which the escalation took place, the intervention of Iran and Hezbollah took place. And going forward, I think it's going to be a matter of, obviously, when the Syrian conflict ends and what type of settlement ends it, because we know now already that there are various forces on the ground that each vying for their own interests, and we can already see that even when there's discussion about the reconstruction. I was reading a report just earlier about the Iranian media and how they are dealing with, a bit of suspicion with the Russian presence as well, in terms of who will get, the major part of the reconstruction, perhaps funds and contracts. So a very complicated factor, but it all boils down to the fact, if you want, very simply, that for the Iranian regime and also for Hezbollah, they could not afford to lose the support of Bashar al-Assad as head of the Syrian government for various reasons. For Iran, Syria is the only country in the Levant where it has an important presence officially, of course, apart from Hezbollah. And for Hezbollah, Syria provides a very important and vital and necessary route for its continuation, for its survival. And this is why the struggle for the defense of the regime was put in such existential terms, so to speak.
Okay. Halim Shebaya in Beirut, thank you very much for your time.